Good lens, too. Fast. 1.4, I think. You notice that diffusion over
Phil,
here?
don't jerk me around. What else have you got?
So, this is a video I wanted to make for quite a while, where essentially I curate a list of underrated films, which as the making of this video have an IMDB rating of less than 6, thus being placed in a category of films which few people venture into based on the rating alone. I should note here that as I am much more accustomed to the rating system of IMDB than, let's say, Rotten Tomatoes, I have frequently encountered through my journeys through IMDB from my own subjective experience that as we start to get below the dreaded 6.0 mark, there's a sort of stark drop in quality of films. It's as if this corresponds to some foul pH index where unwanted properties begin to really creep in. Anyways, let's start off this list where I have not made any particular ranking of the 10 films in question, but they all serve for one reason or another, which I will get into, as representing often overlooked gems which all have been unfairly placed in this lower echelon of the IMDb habitat, inhabiting a rating below the 6 mark. Starting off the list for number 10, we introduce the 1990 romantic comedy Joe Versus the Volcano, directed by John Patrick Shanley, with actor leads provided by 90s favorite rom-com actress Meg Ryan and the unforgettable, friendly, and charismatic Tom Hanks. The film tells the story of a struggling worker and hypochondriac, Joe, played by Hanks, who receives the grim news that he will soon die, and following some series of events proceeds to accept an offer of throwing himself voluntarily into a volcano located at a fictitious tropical island. Along the way, he meets various female characters, all played here by Meg Ryan, as we simultaneously witness Joe making a journey into self-discovery, as well as gaining confidence and conviction along the way. The film is highly enjoyable, taken as a whole, and the world needs more Meg Ryan with quirky accents, as well as the fact that there is a highly memorable luggage salesman in the film who has the best deadpan delivery of relating to Joe that his travel needs are, to quote, very interesting as a luggage problem. Absolutely love this sort of dry humor. Lastly, the world building, such as the highly exaggerated grim workplace of Joe, draws parallels to the films of Wes Anderson, with highly exaggerated landscapes, either full of color or, in the case of The Factory, utterly devoid of them. In addition, a fantastical storytelling is very much opted for in this film in favor of projecting realism, making the film in many ways being told from the stylized vantage point of a fairy tale. This also plays along with a cinematic interpretation of films representing the dream medium projected into fantasized life. In all, certainly deserving of a higher IMDb rating. We next move to 1997 for number 9 on the list.
What's going on in the Cascades?
Picking up some activity around Dante's Peak. Now, what do you think the odds are against an eruption up there?
With Dante's Peak, directed by Roger Donaldson, for which I must admit that I have cheated a bit here, since the current rating sits above the 5s, but I promise that it did have a historical rating in the 5s. 5.9 if I remember correctly. In any case, the film remains highly underrated in my opinion, and belongs to the category of volcano films which go beyond merely brainless, mindless action. Starting off, we get to witness the character of Harry Dalton, here being played by the most aesthetic James Bond, namely Pierce Brosnan, plays a volcanologist who deals with the occurrence of a volcano erupting as he arrives at an American countryside town named aptly Dante's Peak. Brosnan really hammers down the role of the scientist in this film, as well as providing authenticity in the action scenes. I do feel that the last 20 minutes of the film are a bit of a letdown, as it becomes too much of an overt Hollywood blockbuster action film, but nonetheless, the performances overall are stellar, where we see cast alongside Brosnan, T2's very own Linda Hamilton as well. Lastly, one could not mention the film without commenting upon the beautifully done miniatures, which are sprinkled throughout the film, giving an aesthetic, tangible feel of realism, full of the electricity of natural life. The visual effects supervisor of the film, Patrick McClung, deserves credit here, as well as the overall effects team who worked on the movie. It's clear following the film's release that it has stood the test of time, that's for sure. One could also say that, contrary to many films of the same decade, in particular the late 90s, where there was an overuse of, at the time, poorly developed CGI, which in today's filmatic climate looks particularly comical. Dante's Peak, however, represents an exception to this trend. The cars driving over a bridge as the bridge is filled with water is a particular highlight of the film, as well as all the volcanic eruptions that takes place as events are being unfolded are worth mentioning in regards to the stellar effects in particular. Ray Harryhausen would have been proud, which is as much as anyone could say here, I believe. Now, moving back a couple decades, we tackled the highly underrated sequel to 1975's iconic Steven Spielberg shark film, namely Jaws 2, for our number 8 on the list. Directed by Janu Swarst, where you would think that everything that could be meaningfully said about a shark attack on a small fictitious town known as Amity Island in this case has already been told in the previous film, but that is not at all true if one views the second installment with fresh eyes. Yes, inevitably the film will have to conjure up another shark attack, but what really sets apart the second film from the first is that the psychological identity of the police chief, here being played by Roy Schneider in a returning role, is much more explored, as well as his own personal family dynamic in the film. In other words, Police Chief Brody is obviously not the same man as he was in the first film, and we see him in this film dealing with the psychological ramifications of the first. Thus, while the first film symbolized an external threat entering the idyllic island population of Amity Island, which could be seen abstractly as tackling the issue of immigration, the second film symbolizes the theme of PTSD, gaslighting from local residents, as well as the burden of responsibility, which extends strongly to his own family. To conclude then, a sequel which, while not as great of a film as the first installment, nonetheless deserves a proper viewing, where both the performances as well as the directorial execution of the film remain strong. It certainly does not feel out of place compared to the first film of the series, although Schneider at the time apparently hated reprising his role as Chief Brody. Venturing into the much stylized 80s for number 7 on our list, we discuss next a very stylized film, namely 1986 Cobra, directed by George P. Cosmatos. While the film offers nothing in particular in terms of a strong screenplay, except for some cool one-liners sprinkled throughout the film, it does deliver in full terms when it comes to both the visuals as well as the overall film aesthetic, in addition to inhabiting a particularly strong performance by Sylvester Stallone, here taking on a darker performance than the action roles we usually associate or attribute to him. One cannot easily forget him wearing a pair of iconic sunglasses here, as well as a really cool looking weapon in this film, which was very much intentional. The story in its simplicity revolves around the street cop of Marion Marietti, here played by Stallone, who must go out of his way in order to protect the only surviving witness to a strange murderous cult with far-reaching plans. While not offering much in terms of originality, in terms of its story, it does well to blend together horror as well as other slasher elements with that of a police thriller. A genre combination that certainly offered something new in terms of Stallone's filmography at the time, which can be seen in many ways as that of a neo-noir 80s stylization of Dirty Harry. In addition, there is much to love in the performance given by the villain of the film, the Night Slasher, here played by Brian Thompson, who is given an equally stylized look involving a very memorable looking life that you will not forget. The knife also immediately draws connections to other slashers such as the Friday the 13th franchise and the highly underrated Italian film Bay of Blood, which is a must-watch for slasher fans. It is, however, highly lamentable that his character was not more developed throughout the film in terms of a background, but nonetheless, the overall effect of the villain in this film is still very much there. One should mention here in particular the ending confrontation between the main hero of the film and the villain, which remains one of the major highlights of the film. Many have complained about the short runtime of the film, which must have been motivated in part by both censorship issues as well as cutting down the film length in order to secure more screenings at the cinema. But I do feel that the lean runtime works in its advantage, as it highlights the thriller-esque pacing of the film, which immediately starts off in an exciting fashion with a lone gunman who has taken hostages in a supermarket around Christmas time. So yes, this can be considered a Christmas film of sorts, if we stretch our imagination a bit. In conclusion, a highly entertaining as well as artistically executed jumble of genres that remains highly valuable for those interested in exploring a more grittier Stallone film. For number 6 on the list, we mention 2014's Tusk, directed by Kevin Smith, which I suppose is a bit of a hate or love for most people. Smith, who is known for his elongated dialogue and dealing with much of the same subject matter, nonetheless manages to deliver a uniquely original comical horror film full of his characteristic hockey-loving screenplay banter. With a micro-budget to boot, it's obviously a passion project for Smith, but it nonetheless manages to come across as highly engaging throughout somewhat of an odd film, although not nearly as odd as some other films such as the Japanese film House. Anyways, the plot revolves around a podcaster of Wallace Brighton, here played by Justin Long, who travels to the northern regions of Canada in order to interview a recluse, but nonetheless highly eclectic, spontaneous personality comprising that of Howard Ho. The latter character, we later learn, gradually wants to turn Wallace into a walrus, so that's certainly something. Now yes, the film does feature Johnny Depp in one of his characteristic character portrayals, this time taking on the odd Canadian-French inspector of Guy Lapointe, with a nose that looks like it could be literally searching for truffles in the hills of Italy. However, as amusing as this character is, what really seals the film for me is the excellent acting of Michael Parks, who gives an absolute stellar performance as that of Howard Ho. The major highlights of the film are thus the monologues of Parks, as well as the dialogue portions with the lead actor of Wallace, which are both highly disturbing as well as humorous in their neat, macabre own way. In all, a unique film, I must say, and one that will appeal to horror fans as well as admirers of Smith's previous work, most famously his 1994 film Clerks. Now, if you will forgive me, I thought I would end the video here and recap the remaining 5 films in the next video, as I feel the video is already long enough and I wanted to offer a video in which one could quickly browse through some potential overlooked movie candidates with a low IMDB rating in terms of films that hopefully could inspire for a viewing for those who have not seen the film before. Alternatively, if one has seen some of the films before, then I hope at the very least that it gives some inspiration for a re-evaluation of sorts that might take place. So with that, I here end the video, and I hope to have the accompanying video out soon for 5 more picks. Please share, like, and subscribe and all that good stuff, and I will see you in the follow-up video. Cheers!